Hi everyone. So this is the work example for session 4, and this will be problem number 36 of chapter 13 on page 626. So please load up the file, which actually contains only a little bit of data that we need to use. So this is an optimization problem, and let's follow the process of optimization. So the first step is to identify the objective function, the decision variables, and constraints. And the second step is to do the optimization using solver, and the third step is to analyze the result, especially using sensitivity analysis. So let's take one. So let's go through all the steps. So first of all, let's see what the problem is. So the problem is to figure out how many valves do we need to buy from each supplier in order to meet certain requirements. So one of the requirements is to have at least 500 large, 300 medium, and 300 small valves per month. And then the second requirement is that we can't buy more than 500 valves from any of the suppliers, because that's their capability of supply. That's the limit of supply. And then the objective function is to minimize the total cost once we meet all of those requirements. So those requirements are constraints, right? So what are the decision variables? So decision variables are apparently the number of valves that we purchase from each supplier, and the data on this sheet gives us the starting point. So we get the cost per valve from each supplier, and also whenever we get a valve, for example, from supplier 1, 40% of the chance will be a small one, 40% of the chance will be a medium one, 20% of the chance will be a large one. So when we buy a mixture of valves from different suppliers, we have to meet the number of valves for each size, that the requirements, but we want to minimize the total cost. So we want to figure out, based on all that, what would be the number of valves that we purchase from each supplier. So let's set this up first. So I want to set it up in columns. So each column will represent a supplier, just like how the textbook does. So I'm going to start typing supplier 1. So the next one will be supplier 2 and supplier 3. But Excel is usually smart enough to copy that, so I'm just going to copy across, and then I'm going to make all these columns a little bigger. Or actually, I need to highlight all these, and then change the width, change all of the width at the same time. Okay, I'm going to put these in the middle, so it looks a little nicer. And then I'm going to create certain labels. So I'm going to figure out what's the percentage of small valves, medium-sized valves from each supplier, and also the large valves from each supplier. And then the next one, I'm going to leave a space because it's a little different. So I'm just going to say cost per valve. So that's another one that I need to copy from down there, up there. So all these are labels for the rest of the data. So I just want to right align that, so all of the labels, all of the labels will be shown through. Okay, so I need to copy. So let me do this one first. So I need to copy the cost per valve from here to here. Well, it's actually very easy just to copy the numbers, right? We just type in 20, 16, and 12. But I just want to use a little trick just in case that you would encounter similar situations. So when you copy something from that's arranged in one column, and you want to copy it into a row. So basically you want to take a set of values that are arranged in one column, and then you want to put it in a row. Then what do? Well, you can do a copy and paste, but you just have to specify a way, the specific fashion that the Excel has to paste it. So this is how you do it. You highlight this part, you copy it, Control C, right? The same thing, And then you put your cursor here, or you can highlight all three, or you can just highlight the first cell. And then you go to paste. Now you can't use Control P. You just have to go to the paste button, and then don't click on the top. Don't click on the paste button, but click on the down arrow, and then select paste special. You want to paste everything, but the difference is that you want to select the transpose because you're changing it from column to row. So if you click OK, then you see that 20, 16, and 12, they're copied into a row from a column. So that's great. And we can do the same thing for here, right? Because it used to be arranged in columns like this, all the same size from the suppliers. Now the same size from suppliers will be copied into a row. So I can do the same thing, right? But there's one more thing we need to do, because this is all shown as percentages, 40%, 40%, 20%. But in fact, the percentages are actually 0.4. 40% is actually 0.4. 30% is actually 0.3. So basically, when you try to calculate, or when you try to calculate, for example, the 40% of 10 is what? Is 40% of 10 is actually 4. It's not 40. It's not 40 times 10. It's actually 0.4 times 10. Right. So when you do the calculation, you have to take that into account. So in order to make sure that the confusion doesn't happen, so when I copy here, I want to show 40% or 0.4 instead of 40, because there's a difference of 100 times. So how do I make that adjustment? So whenever I copy from here to here, I need to transpose it, but at the same time, I want to reduce this by 100 times. So I'm going to give it a factor of reduction, so basically 0.01. So I'm going to tell Excel, whenever I copy something to here, I want to reduce it by 100%, by 100, or just multiply the number by this 0.01. So I'm going to put 0.01 in every single cell, every single destination cell here. Okay. Oh, let me do it. Like copy it all across, and then I copy it down, so everybody has 0.01 here. Then once I've done that, then I'm going to highlight this part, go to copy, click on the down arrow, select paste special. I want to check transpose, of course, but here I'm going to do multiply. So when I copy, I'm not just going to copy it over to the destination cell. I'm going to copy it over and then take whatever that destination cell already has and multiply by that. So I'm going to click OK. Then you see, oh, the selection. I forgot the selection. Sorry, that was a pretty dumb mistake. I need to select this part, and then I do the copy. Oh, that was wrong. So I'm going to copy this. So and then I'm going to select the destination. That's this part. I'm going to click on the down arrow, select paste special, click on transpose, and then I'm going to select multiply. So what's going to happen is that I'm going to copy 40 multiplied by 0.01, and I'm going to put it here, and so on. Click OK, then you see that they are all reduced by 100 times. So I'm just going to change this to percentages, then I'm done. Okay, so now I have all these factors, and then using the convention, I'm actually going to follow a very common financial analyst convention. I'm going to put in all the assumptions, or put what we call hardwired numbers. I'm going to use that. I'm going to color them blue, and then you can see that whatever that's calculated, it will be shown as regular color, and whatever that's hardwired or whatever is assumptions will be shown as blue. So I'm going to change all these to blue. That's just my own convention, so you don't have to follow that, but this will make things a little easier to see. And then so now these are all the assumptions, and let's find what the decision variables are. The decision variables are actually the number of valves that we're going to purchase from different suppliers. So I'm going to put it there, the number by supplier. So this is like so this will be made very clear, because if I move to D13, so that's number by supplier 1, the next one is number by supplier 2, and the number by supplier 3, right? So these three will be the three decision variables for this optimization. So now I'm going to name all these cells. So that will make my life a little easier down the road. So I want to name everything on row 8 small. I want to name everything on row 9 medium, and so on and so forth. You see that I don't really want to name row 11, but if I just highlight this, then it doesn't really matter because that one is a blank row anyway. It's just my separation. So if I want to name all that, then all I have to do is just to highlight this, and then I go to formulas, and then it's create from selection, and I want to name everything to the right using the content of the first column, the left column, as the label, as the name. So I'm going to click OK. It doesn't show anything, but if you highlight these, then you see that it's called small. If you highlight all three, then it's called medium. If you highlight all these, then that's called cost per valve, and so on. Right? So that's good. Okay, so now let's calculate. Let's do the objective function. So the objective function is the total cost. I can calculate the total cost for each. Okay, but I can just do the simple total cost. So the simple total cost is the cost per valve multiplied by the number of suppliers. So if you do this one, then it's actually just this, right? Multiply by D13, and then you can actually copy it across, and that's total cost from each supplier when you buy from each supplier. So what is the total cost that you want to minimize? Well, the total cost is actually just the sum of all three. Or if you don't add in all that, then you can actually use a very useful function called sum product, which I use a lot. So sum product is to take one column or one row and multiply by every corresponding cell of another column or another row. Well, actually, you can have multiple rows or multiple columns to be in the sum product, but two columns or two rows are the most common one. So you can imagine that, for example, if you record all the transactions, then one column records the for instance the number of units. The second column records the unit cost. Then if you take the one column multiplied by the second column, then and then add them all up, then you get the total revenues from all the different transactions. So here is the same thing. So if I do the cost per valve multiplied by number of suppliers, cell by cell, then I get the total cost, right? So another advantage of using this is that now you can actually use names, because we already named the cost per valve, and then when you start typing cost, then Excel identify, or Excel finds in its memories what are the names or functions that start with cost. Then it finds the cost per valve. Then all I have to do is just double click on that. So I selected that, and then I multiply that by the number by supplier, that, and then I close it, press enter. Then this will be my objective function. So let me enlarge this a little bit, and then I'm going to change this to currency. Okay, so now this part is all done. So the next part will be constraints. So let me do the constraints here. So I'm just going to call constraints. Let me see if I spelled it right. Constraints. Okay, so what are the constraints? Well, the constraints are the following. So I can buy the total number of small and the total number of medium and the total number of large, and they are all limited by no, there are certain requirements for that, right? We need total number of we need the total number. So these are so we need to calculate how many large, how many small, and how many medium we get. So how do we know the total number of small, total number of medium, total number? Oh, let me finish the constraint first. Then I'll fill out these three. So these three cells will contain the actual number of total number of small valves. total medium valves and total large valves. So the constraint looks like this. So this has to be greater than or equal to, so all three are greater than or equal to certain limits. Okay, so I need to have at least 300 small, right? And then 300 medium, and then 500 500 large. So this is the first constraint. So we need to calculate the total number of small, total number of medium, total number of large. So to calculate this, then we use sum product again. I'm going to select sum product. So now you see how powerful this is. So I can find small, because this is the small is the name for that. Small is the name for this row. So I'm just going to have to figure out the 40% of supplier 1, plus 30% of supplier 2, plus 20% of supplier 3. And then that will be the total number of small valves. So small multiplied by the number by supplier. So that will be the total number of small, right? So the first one is done, and then I can just repeat the same process. So this will make my life much easier. So I just say medium, and then I just select medium, and then I select the number of supplier here, and then the next one's the same thing. I'm just gonna do sum product, and then I'm gonna select large right here, and then I'm gonna select number by suppliers, and I get that. So basically, these are the three constraints, right? The total small valves need to be at least 300. Total medium valves need to be at least 300, and total large valves need to be at least 500. But also for each supplier, so the other one that I can only write it out. So I'll just write it out like this. Actually, I'll just write it out like this. So each supplier can only supply from each supplier. Each supplier, I'm just writing it like this, and then has to be smaller or equal to 500, because each supplier. Oh, this doesn't look good. Actually, let me put it. Yeah, let me put it this way. So each supplier will be less than or equal to 500. Okay, so we set this up all right. Everything is set up correctly, right? Okay, perfect. Okay, so now let's do the optimization. So we have established everything. Oh, let me get rid of this. This is outside the. Okay, so it's pretty clean. So let's do the optimization. So we have all these hardwired numbers. We have the decision variables right here. And then we have all these constraints. Perfect. So what do? So we just go to data, and we call on solver. Okay. Now let me move it here, and then we see that the solver is asking us all these questions. So the first one is the objective cell. The objective cell is right here. Remember, it's the G10. So G10 is the total cost, and we want to minimize it. So that's that. So the variable cells are, you can highlight this part, or I can just give it a name. This is actually, let me actually highlight this. This is easier because it actually doesn't, when I type, one reason I use range name is that when I type, the Excel just gives me a list, but it doesn't give me a list. So I just want to avoid typos. So I'm actually going to select all these. So these are so from D9 through F9. So those are the decision variables. So the next thing is to do constraints. So what are the constraints? So the constraints are all of these numbers have to be greater than or equal to all of these numbers. So we can do it one by one. We can do 14 and then F and then F13 and so on and so forth. Or we can do it quicker, so we can just highlight all three, and then we want to make sure we change that to greater than or equal to, and then we highlight all three here. So correspondingly, F14 has to be smaller, no, D14 has to be greater than or equal to F14, D15 has to be greater than or equal to D15, and so are D16 and F16. So that's uh, one set of constraints actually contains 3 equations. Another constraint is each supplier can only be less than 500. So each supplier number will be right here. So all 3 of them has to be less than 500. You notice that I selected all 3 and then only use one number there. So Excel will interpret each cell will be smaller than 500. Okay, so if I put in 3 numbers there, then Excel will make the corresponding inequality. But if I only put in one number on the right hand side, then Excel will make the same inequality for each of the left hand side selection. I click OK, then everything looks fine, and I want to make sure that I want to make unconstrained variable non-negative. And I'm going to use simplex on LP. So that's the simplex linear programming. Remember, that's an easier way to solve that, and that's the only thing that we're going to talk about in this class. And then everything is set up. I'm going to click solve, and then it asks me this. Okay, so what do I want to do? Do I want to keep the solver solution because they already found the solution, and then but I also want a sensitivity report. Okay, so then I'm going to click OK. Then you see that's the solution. That's pretty neat, right? So in order to meet all these requirements, or to meet all the constraints, then the solution is right here. Actually, I'm going to highlight the solution part. So this is the solution part. I'm going to highlight this part. So we buy 125 from supplier number 1. We get 500 from supplier number 2. We get 500 from supplier number 3. And after I've done that, remember I added also so the total amount, the total cost will be $16,500. So we got the solution. Perfect. So it's done. So we finished the second part. So the first part, remember, was to set up the model. So the model was set up on a spreadsheet. The second part was to optimize it. So basically, I have just to fill out the dialog box of solver correctly. So we've done that, and then and then the third part that we have to do is to really interpret the numbers, and also do the sensitivity analysis. So I specified a sensitivity report. So that's right here. So let me show you that. That's a sensitivity report. So there are